So, welcome everybody. This is week number 2 now. Last week we covered the manifesto, and today's going to get, I think, a little bit on the deep side with our lesson, but we'll see. So, like I wanted to do earlier, I wanted to just kind of check in with everybody, see if there were any questions, any lingering doubts about the manifesto. If you have any questions right now, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, we can get into the quote of the day. So, but yeah, I wanted to give you a chance. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to bring up?
Is it cool if the assignment wasn't exactly in a manifesto format?
Yeah. I mean, remember, any assignments that I assign y'all, it's not like a very strict guideline that I'm asking you to follow. It's basically just a way to get you writing. So if it got you writing, that's all the better.
Yeah, I was really trying to make it one, but it wasn't cooperating, and the poem wanted to be what it wanted to be,
Yeah. That happens, So, okay. Well, that's good. I'm glad that I look forward to reading what you came up with. I'm sure it's going to be something, unique and interesting. So, yeah, thanks, Mal. Thanks for asking. Same goes for everybody else, too. If at any point any of the writing prompts that I assign you, they're just not coming out, just write what comes and turn it in. I'm always happy to give you feedback on anything. So, yeah. Same for you, Abraham. Kind of went a different direction. Yeah. It's all good. All good. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead, take a look at our quote of the day. So aquí les va. Today we're going to be talking about, some big concepts, some old concepts here. So it's only fitting that we discuss the quotes attributed to a couple of old guys. People that are no longer around and able to defend themselves from our critique. But today, we're going to start off with 2 quotes. First one comes from Plato. In Spanish, we know him as Platón. His birth date is disputed. Nobody really knows exactly when he was born, but it could be anywhere between 428 or 427 BC, or he was born 424, the year 423 BC, and he passed away somewhere between the years 348 and 347 BC. Plato, as many of you probably know, was an Athenian philosopher during the classical period in ancient Greece. He was also the founder of the Platonist school of thought and the Academy, which was the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. As you can see here, he wrote, or was quoted as saying, "Those who tell the stories rule society." Y en español aquí les tengo la cita de Platón que dice, "Los que cuentan los cuentos dominan a la sociedad." So what do y'all think of what Plato is saying here? Go ahead and post it up in the chat too so you guys can reference it. El homeboy Plato. ¿Qué dice el homeboy Plato para ustedes? Abraham?
Well, it's the same as to the victor goes the spoils, right? Because who's going to write the story? Basically, the ones who are putting the schools up or have the power to silence also the others. So that's the sad part about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's I think kind of the negative side. I like what Mauricio wrote. History is written by the winners. Yeah, that's another way of interpreting it. Karen, and then Ani. Karen?
Yeah, I was just thinking about history is written by the winners, but this is kind of more like you win by writing the history. It kind of flips that a little bit. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Like, that's how you win, is by controlling the narrative. Not that you win, and that gives you the ability to control the narrative.
Yeah, I kind of take it in that way. I try to see the positive in it. But Ani and then Jess. Ani, what you got to say?
Well, my first reaction was, this is turning into a very political Conchas, and as a storyteller, right, as writers, it sounded like, yeah, we can rule the world. But the saying history is written by the victors. It really it does seem that it's those who rule that actually tell the stories. But if you want to cause a disruption or revolution, then you publish flyers and spray them all over town, and you draw on the side of buildings and do graffiti art and things like that. And so that is I guess it goes both ways. So if you want to take the power, then you have to take the mic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to remember, right, that history is written by the winners, as Mauricio quoted, is not the quote, right? The quote is, those who tell the stories rule society. So we are sort of, I think, forgetting a little bit what the quote is saying. And Ani, I think you're right. Like, this can go sort of both ways, and reminding us that, we have to tell our stories regardless of whether or not we're in power or not. But let's hear from the others. So Jessica, then Miss Luz, and then Mauricio. So Jess.
I was just gonna say that too. I didn't see when whatever.
Plato?
No, not Plato. Who said that? Victor, whatever, is by the winners or whatever. Oh, Mauricio. Wasn't it Victor? Whatever. Anyway, yeah, I didn't even get that at all, because rule number one doesn't mean you win. I mean, you win over something, but not win overall. I mean, Hitler was technically a winner, right? I mean, he ruled a society. So it doesn't, I think win puts a positive thing when there's really, when it comes to like ruling, it's either just or unjust versus winning and losing. So I think it's more whoever's ruling or whoever's sold the best story is running that particular society, depending on who you're talking to. Really more who has the better pitch, and that's who will rule that specific society. Like there's a ruler in all different, you can even select classes, right? So, but it's not about winning and losing, it's just about who's going to control or not control.
Yeah, I like that observation. There's definitely something about controlling the narrative built into what the quote is saying. Ms. Luz, cuéntame.
Well, basically what came to mind is, I'm afraid, our last president, who was given the platform to become president, and ended up with the power. So I guess for me, it's whoever gets or is given the platform ends up with the power, because they get to spin it the way they want to, right?
Yeah. Spin, I think, is kind of like the new way of saying, right, that control of the narrative. How do you spin it? Mauricio?
I'm thinking also, like what I was saying, Jess, like I think also it goes to the power of storytelling as we pass our own histories down versus what maybe are history textbooks, because I think, like, I don't know, I'm trying to change the definition of what winning means. Like if you like win a war, sure, there's going to be more literature out about the winners of the war, and you won't see so much of the other side. But I think also in winning, as in like a culture enduring, and a culture that like outlasts its suppressors and outlasts like the people that subjected them. So like those stories get passed down, and they in turn like rule their own narrative and rule their own, history that way by continuing to, share those stories that were meant for them to kind of, uplift them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you have to. Anybody can tell you. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Like they could say anything, just be. I don't know. I know what I'm trying to say, but I guess I can't say it. I guess I look at who is governed versus when. So those are not the only books that are out there. There's so many books that are out that we luckily here have a choice to read whatever we want.
Yeah, that's very true. Unfortunately, not every place is like that. And I think the quote is trying to get at, like, the story that maybe are kind of passed down and spoken to, like, those will endure within their own people. And hopefully, it's spread across more people. That winning aspect is that story remains in the zeitgeist. And you're right. I mean, like, there are more options to, like, read about alternative, I guess, history, or knowing, like, what has been whitewashed.
Right, like which
cultures. Yeah, for sure.
Now.
Yeah.
I love the conversation that's happening, and I think that part of what Plato was maybe trying to say was more or less what everybody is sort of sharing in their own point of view. Those who tell the stories rule society. So there is sort of like a power that we wield as storytellers. There's a power that can be exerted over society based on the type of story that is told. Right? Yes, to the spoils go to the victor, or the winner in history is the one that tells the story. But like ultimately, I think that it's sort of a reminder of the power of storytelling, the power of narrative control, the power that all of you have as writers, whether you're published or unpublished. As in the inherent act of telling your story, you are in a way ruling your own way of presenting who you are, or your community, that kind of thing. So yeah, only in the first 5 minutes of the class, we are getting a little on the political side, but ultimately, we need to remember this, because that's sort of what brought us to this current point in history, right? People were trying to control the story. People, still to this day are trying to craft their own narrative and have a story that will somehow back them up when or if the time comes again for them to run for president again, or something along the lines of that. So, the manifesto from last week, the reason why I brought that up for last week, is because we are sort of self-assigning ourselves with the task of creating unity, right? There is a way for us to bring people together. And there's a way for us to use our words and our writing to empower and invoke justice, right? Because ultimately we all belong to a group of people that have not been represented, I think, in our government, in larger society. Most of us are here because we're writers, and who are usually the first ones to get persecuted or to get lost in society, but us, the writers, the artists. Because we have these radical ideas that sometimes scare people, because we are the storytellers. We are the ones that actually can rule societies and influence them. So keep that in mind. That said, our second quote of the day, which, be afraid, as Tina says, be afraid. But the second quote of the day today comes from none other than Aristoteles. Aristotle. And for those who don't know, Aristotle was born in the year 384 BC and is believed to have passed away the year 322 BC. So he came a little bit after Plato. He was actually one of Plato's students. But Aristotle is a Greek philosopher and polymath during the classical period in ancient Greece. Like I said, he was a student of Plato's. So a lot of the things that Aristotle is known for, he learned from Plato and Socrates ultimately, who was Plato's teacher. But anyways, he is the founder of the Lyceum and the Peripatetic school of philosophy and the Aristotelian tradition. So, aquí les traducí lo que dice Aristóteles y dice, el propósito del arte es representar no la apariencia exterior de las cosas, sino su importancia interna. The aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. I'm going to copy that into our chat. So if those who tell stories are the rulers of society, the way in which we tell a story, that's going to be important. But what is Aristotle saying to us as poets? Because, storytellers, regardless of what form you're using, you're ultimately using some form of art to tell your stories. So what is the aim of art? What is the purpose of poetry or any kind of writing? Do you agree with what Aristotle says? See a hand raised from Mauricio.
I think it's the why we share our stories.
Of what Aristotle was saying?
Yeah. Like the reason behind, our drive to share our stories, what they mean to us, what they mean to us as a people, how things maybe should mean to us.
Okay.
It's still manifesting, still cooking.
Right on, man. Right on. Let it manifest. I see that Ani also agrees with the why. This is maybe the why we create. Tina, did you raise your hand?
Yes, well, after I read it, I just wrote down it's about what you can't see. So I guess the way to show art or the way to show our insides is to write or to paint, and that expresses the things that people can't see in ourselves.
Yeah, it goes a little deeper, right? It's not just about the outward appearance. This is about going beyond the superficial. Yeah. Jess, did you raise your hand?
I agree with Tina. That's what I put down. I wrote down underneath it, look deeper. But then thinking about it with Plato and Aristotle, I thought it can go both ways. Like saying, when you're writing, I'm just going to say writing is the art that they're talking about, or how I interpret it. Don't represent like the facade, right, of what society, society's story, right, of saying, show what's deeper, show beyond that, say something, like what we talked about before, like woke or whatever. Wasn't that like the topic of this whole stuff, like stay woke, like again? So as an artist, you have that power to tell stories, like you just said. Storytellers have the power to rule society. So if you're going to rule society and you are a writer and stand for a manifesto, something that you care about, then aim to represent what this facade is showing you and what's underneath it, like deeper than that. And it could be they're just fronting and they're making you feel it's an inferiority type of facade for the person reading it, or it could be the other way around, depending on who the writer wants to contribute to society, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think that ultimately this is a quote that is giving you at least kind of like some direction, maybe on why we should write, and why we should really think about the things that we write. because again, what Plato was saying, right? Those who tell the stories of rural societies, there's a great power to that, right? Just like what we were saying last week about, the I think it was Robert Frost who had said, I'm not a teacher, I'm an awakener. There's a great power to being the teacher, in recognizing your authority, right? So if the teacher is the same as the artist, and if the artist is an awakener, and if the artist is the one that's telling the stories, then the awakener is the one that is ruling society, right? It is the role of the person that, has this power. It's your role to now awaken people, to maybe shift people's points of view in a certain way so that you maintain either your role in society, or you are willing to give up your role so that other people can have a place, at the table, basically. In some ways, this is about trying to be as inclusive as you can be, while also recognizing that, you are the way in which inclusivity could happen. At least that's sort of how I'm making these connections, in my mind. Because again, we're trying to create unity, right? Like Mauricio says, the awakener may not necessarily be awakened either. This takes a lot of self-reflection to be able to understand that we have a lot of like personal responsibility, in bringing people in. So that is really important. That's why, to have this topic of unity for our overarching theme for these 12 weeks, we have to recognize our own place in society and our own actions and our own roles that we play in the way that we interact with people, which is all about, I think, honestly, the way that we craft our poetry and our writing. It's our audience that we're always thinking about. That includes ourselves, because we are part of our own audience. Abraham wrote, I think in order to create art, you have to have an understanding of the inner, deeper things at play, even if you end up only showing the shell or the exterior. Yeah, I think that's more or less what I'm getting at. This is about going deeper. So, any last questions or comments about the quotes, the two quotes here from Plato and Aristotle? Well, I'll give you all a chance, because it's about to get even more deep than how we usually get. So as I was thinking about our lesson for this week, one idea came to mind, and as part of my studies when I was at Cal State San Marcos, actually, when I was getting my bachelor's degree many years ago, I had to take classes on critical theory, and one particular theory I really wanted to cover, which was pluralism. But you can't cover pluralism without talking about this first one, monism. So to give you a little bit of background on monism it's a philosophy. It's a type of philosophy that, as you can see here, can be broken down into multiple different ways of interpreting monism. But this particular worldview, this particular philosophy, can be considered to be as old as the beginning of Hinduism. Right? So in Hindu, there's the concept of monism, that all things come from one source, right? The basic definition or the more current definition of monism is that it attributes oneness or singleness to a concept. For example, existence, right? And again, there's different types of monism that exist. Beginning with monism, the priority monism. Right? Monismo espiritual declara que toda cosa que existe proviene de un fuente distinto a tal. again, this is like the main one, right? Priority monism states that all existing things go back to a source that is distinct from them. In Neoplatonism, so Neoplatonism meaning, theories that came after Plato and his theories on monism, some of the philosophers that came after Plato called it the one. So everything comes from the one, the source, right? La singularidad. En este caso, solo una cosa existe antes de lo demás. So all things, think of this as kind of like the Big Bang theory, right? Priority monism is basically saying that all reality, all existence comes from that one particular source, the one. If you think in like astrophysics, again, that'd be like the Big Bang. But this could be, a lot of different ways of explaining the one, such as, God, or, the Father God, who gives birth to all the pantheon of gods. So that's priority monism. Now, existence monism posits that there exists only a single thing, the universe, which can only be artificially and arbitrarily divided into many things. So what this one means, existence monism, think of it as kind of like the way that everything is composed, right? There exists atoms in the universe, right? So now we're talking about like chemistry and physics. Existence monism is kind of saying that there's an energy, and then the energy would have an outside force that comes in and sort of captures that energy, which then becomes a molecule, which then becomes a chain of molecules to become a substance and that kind of thing. Substance monism, the next one, o monismo materialista, postula que solo existe un tipo de material, aunque varias cosas pueden ser hechas de tal material. Por ejemplo, la materia o la mente. Substance monism is kind of like saying that there is either one or the other. That all things come from one kind of stuff, but it's either the mind or matter. The way that you can think of substance monism is to think of it as like, our brains are composed of matter. And so because our brains are composed of matter, that means, logically speaking, that our soul and our consciousness is also made up of matter. And so it's only possible to understand our existence as being the product of some kind of matter. The opposite would be that our minds and our consciousness are the only thing that exist, and our bodies, everything that we can feel and touch, is a byproduct of our consciousness creating them. So we exist only because our mind, our consciousness believes we exist. So this one, substance monism, is a little bit more, how should I describe it? It's a little bit more about theory, right? Theoretically, our brains are not actually, like we just exist in a material way. We do not exist in a spiritual or existential kind of way. Or the opposite is true. That's kind of where dual aspect monism sort of comes in. So el monismo intermedio es el punto de vista que lo mental y lo físico son dos aspectos o perspectivas de la misma sustancia primaria. Right? So basically what I'm saying is that dual aspect monism sort of makes up for the logic of substance monism. It's not either or. It's saying that basically it's about the perspective that you choose to follow, right? Dual aspect monism opens it up so that you can understand our existence as being both real because we are conscious that it's real, but it's also real because the material aspect of us, the physical components that make us who we are also real. So dual aspect monism basically opens it up to other ways of understanding. That's kind of a lot. So I want to make sure that y'all got it. You know, let me look back at what's in the chat. Atman or Brahma, yeah, we all are part of Brahman. So that's kind of where the priority monism sort of comes in, as Mauricio put in. Or if you think of it as Mother Nature, as Jess put it in the chat, you know, that's another way of thinking it, right? That is the source. We all are a product of Mother Nature. Unless if you believe in the multiverse, which we'll get to that actually. So I see some.
Mauricio's gonna have a manifesto on it, so we'll all know how to survive.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
So where would you put what came first, the chicken or the egg?
That's a really good question, and I think that's kind of like the paradox that monism tries to sort of avoid, because there's no real way that you can answer that for sure. You know, if all things come from the source, well, where did the source come from, right? If the chicken has to lay an egg, you know, it can't exist before the egg because you need an egg in order to have a chicken, right?
That's
so
what I'm trying to figure out, where of these isms does this fall into? But
that's an existential paradox, right?
Okay.
So we have no answer for that. How did being come to be? We don't know.
Sorry about this if it's impossible. No, I'm just kidding. It'll work way harder than it needs to be.
Yeah. This is, like I said, you know, we're getting into philosophy, and so, you know, this is some sort of deep stuff, right? But, you know, there's definitely a place for that in what we're learning, right? Does someone else have a question about monism, though? Did I sort of explain it in a way that makes sense? All right. So now, Mauricio, yes, you're still in the right class. It's not a PhD program, not exactly, but you know, philosophy does play a very large role here in writing. And even though you might not necessarily like it, San Juanita, you know, this is definitely something that that you're probably thinking about as you're writing and you don't even know. You know, especially once you start to think of, you know, different ways in which our writing should exist, because nothing exists in a vacuum. Right? Now, if there aren't any other questions about monism, I don't want to like confuse anybody, but we're going to now talk about pluralism. Cthulhu is the source. And yes, Tina's right. It is okay to say you don't like something. It's totally okay. So monism is going to ultimately take us to pluralism. So el pluralismo es un término usado en la filosofía que significa la doctrina de la multiplicidad, usado en oposición al monismo, la doctrina de la unidad, y dualismo, la doctrina de la dualidad. So, monism, as you can see here, right, it's considered to be the doctrine of unity. So monism is believed, or, you know, that philosophy, the idea behind it is that everything comes from the source, right? Comes from one place, or is perceived as a byproduct of everything being all one and the same, right? So where monism as a philosophy is trying to get you to think about things all being made out of the same material, pluralism is about multiplicity, right? It's about the idea that we can come to things in more than one way. Dualism, the doctrine of duality, as you can see here, is going to kind of take you in a different direction. It's sort of where monism, the last one here, the dual aspect monism, kind of leaves us, right? But it's about dualities. So everything exists in like contrast to something else, right? Whereas the doctrine of multiplicity, think of it this way. everything exists not in contrast to its opposite, but it exists alongside all the other things that exist. So it sort of gives everything a sort of same significance, same importance. Right? But there's different ways to understand pluralism based on the way you're thinking about it. So in metaphysics, which is the fundamental nature of reality, pluralism is the doctrine that, unlike monism or dualism, there are many different substances in nature that constitute reality. One way to think of this is that, the different ways in which we interact with the world, they're the ways that we know that things are real, right? We know that they're real because we can touch them. We know that they're real because we can see them. We can hear them. We can taste them, right? That helps us understand that reality is in fact reality because there's different ways in which we can interact with things. Now, in ontology, which is the study of the concept of existence and being, pluralism refers to different ways, kinds, or modes of being. As an example here from what I was able to find, pluralism is the comparison of the modes of existence of things like humans and cars, in contrast with things like numbers and other concepts that are scientific. So the way that you can kind of understand the ontological pluralism is to say, we exist as physical objects, right? Cars are physical objects. We can go outside, we can touch a car. We understand that it's made up of different types of materials, including plastic, metal, there's gas and oil and all sorts of other things that make up what we understand to be a car. But other things exist too that we cannot see, things like numbers. Right? We know that numbers exist because math exists. Math is a sort of language. Sound exists in that, it's a wavelength that we're able to capture with our ears, and there's different levels of it, right? So there's these sort of concepts that we can measure, but we can't physically feel them. So pluralism is basically telling us that the world exists, that our universe exists with these things that are seen and unseen. All right, so that's the different ways in which things can be considered to exist. In epistemology, so the study of the nature, origin, and scope of knowledge. Now, this is where, we can talk a little bit more about, hopefully what we've been discussing. But in epistemology, pluralism is the position that there is not one consistent means of approaching truths about the world, but rather many. And this is a lot of times associated with pragmatism or relativism. Right? So what that means is that, when we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about the collection of all the things that we know. And there's a lot of different ways of getting to those things. And, the relativism part of it is that, what is correct in one society may not be correct in another. Where, for some people, cannibalism might be a good thing, or human sacrifice is a good thing. In another culture, it's considered a bad thing. So depending on where you are, which culture, which society you belong to, you will consider it to be either good or bad, right? And so the study of nature, origin, scope of knowledge, that's essentially saying that pluralism gets you to different ways of understanding, based on where you're from, who you are, what you believe in. Lastly, in logic, pluralism is the view that there is no one correct logic, or that there is more than one correct logic. And so now we're talking about, the way that proofs work and the way that logical arguments might work. Pluralism basically says that there is no one single way of understanding the world. Logically, there's paradoxes, and you might accept one rule of logic, one system of logic, to explain away certain things, but then you'll accept another system of logic to explain other things that can't be explained by the first one. This is something that you would see a lot in like astrophysics, you know. That's sort of where pluralism can come in there. And yeah. Now, that was also a lot. Does anybody have any questions now about pluralism and what pluralism basically means? Let me scroll back up here in the chat. Mao, saw you raise your hand, and so did Abraham.
I think Jess was first.
Oh, okay. Jess?
No, I was just gonna say, I feel like when you're reading through all of them, it's almost describes like the growth in thinking. Like I think, well, Christianity, you know, I grew up with monoism, and then when I moved out and started to grow up, I became a whatever the next one was, and I think now that I've lived life for a while, I'm more of a. Does that make sense? I feel like I've been all three of these in different times of my life, or thought about life all three ways, depending on what was around me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, philosophically speaking, we all, I think, evolve over time and we come to understand our existence in different ways, right? For some people, from like, say, the more Christian worldview, you know, you might think that, you know, God, whoever that God is the creator of all things and always existed. And so, you know, we are a product of that God. We are the same as that God. We are made up of the same stuff that God is made up of, right? The Bible, the Christian Bible says, you know, we were made in his image. Therefore, we must also be that same God, right? You can make those logical arguments. Whereas pluralism, you know, pluralism is basically saying, you know, that there's more than one way to understand how we came to be, right? There's more than one way to understand that knowledge is considered knowledge, or that we can achieve a level of knowledge. It's like saying that there's multiple paths to the same point, right? But it's also saying that there are multiple ways in which the world can exist. If you think of it kind of like from society, you know, there's multiple ways in which people can express themselves, right? There are multiple stories. I think one of my favorite sayings in Spanish is cada cabeza su propio mundo, right? Every mind is its own world. If you think of it in that way, you know, you can say that we are all basically little planets that are walking around as part of a larger galaxy, as part of a larger universe that functions together, right? We all kind of end up coming to the same realizations in life, most of us, in that we exist and we exist together, right? We can all individually be our own individual self, but, you know, there might be somebody that's very similar to me down the street, but they're their own self. And so that doppelganger of mine will have their own unique tastes, their own unique style, right?
You know, that reminds me of, after going with the recipes again, making a cake, all the different ingredients, but it comes to one common substance. I mean, one attitude with all the different parts. That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you know, it's basically what we're all, I'm hoping, understanding of these ideas is that everything has its place. Everything has a function, right? The universe would not exist without, say, you know, X-rays, just like it wouldn't exist without sound waves. You know, cake would not exist without flour, you know, eggs and milk. right? Like those are core ingredients, right? And we need these core ingredients in order to bring something into existence. So, yeah, I'm glad the food analogies are resonating. Carbón, pollo al carbón. Yeah. Mao, and then I think Abraham.
I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm still formulating it. I'm trying to tie in what we talked about first with what we're talking about now. And what I'm thinking is, at one point, all of these theories came from someone. Came from a person or a group of people. So whether or not these are actually true without our existence, like would they exist if we never existed, I think is beyond like what we can ever comprehend. But the fact that we created these theories out of our minds, I think just goes to show how powerful, our stories, in this example, our theories go into defining our lives and, how the universe works. Like we can never really know for sure whether, the universe exists within these like pluralism, ideas or monoism. But the fact that we can develop them, I think just goes to show the power of like, how we like can create these ideas and almost like will it to be,
Yeah.
Like I honestly like I dig both sides. Like I thought I would be like more on one than the other, but seeing them like it's almost like I found different examples that would fit perfectly into each type of monisms and pluralism. So it's like I'm very torn right now because I can't pick one way of thinking that would just apply to everything else. Because right immediately after, like something else, so I'll think of something else and it'll be like, no, this applies more to monism, or this applies more to like the ontological part of pluralism. So I'm in a clusterfuck. So thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Welcome to the world of being a writer. Because ultimately, this is, I think, a lot of the things that make us all want to write, make us all sort of, I don't know. I mean, writing is such an introspective process that is also a very public process, especially if you're sharing it and publishing it. I mean, before I get into the example of what's happening in the chat here with the cake, Abraham and then Ani.
I just want to say pluralism rocks. First, because it's the theory on its own, but also gives credit to the monism, because it says that can be also true, or it has the same importance. And I don't know, religion is the same thing, because you see church of the same religion, but different types of church, ways of interpreting. So pluralism, that's why we see blind people have a different perspective of the world than us, or even animals, because of the way they perceive the world, right?
Right.
So that's why pluralism is the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, not just different societies, animal society, human society.
Yeah.
Which has a totally different, like, rule systems, So, like, everything that we talked about just throws out the window when you change, like, what they, like, I lost the word, but yeah, you change the system because of who it's being directed at,
Yeah. Ani?
So after we went through monism, I was like, I think I kind of get it, but pluralism, I'm sure, will help to explain it. And I thought that I had some clarity about one compared to the other. And then this whole cake conversation started in the chat, and I'm completely confused. So I think you need to address the cake thing because it seems to be a metaphor that a lot of people have been able to engage with, but there's a lot of a lack of clarity about what the cake actually means. So here you go.
All right. So let me address the cake metaphor then. Because I think the cake metaphor that's happening in the chat is actually a pretty good metaphor for this. So now keep in mind, right, that we're going to use some very basic ingredients here for this cake, and we're going to talk about a homemade cake, right? Now let's assume that you live on a farm, right? And on that same farm, you have, the wheat, you have the, cows that produce the milk, and you have the chickens that produce the eggs. Right? So those three basic ingredients, they all came from your single farm, right? If that single farm is the source, then that cake is a product of the source. That would be monism, right? Now, let's assume that you had to go to the store to buy the, flour. You had to go to the store to buy, the eggs and all of that. Now we're bringing in other farms, right? So these other farms, that the one that produces the flour, that's its own source. And then you have the, the chicken farm where all the eggs come from. And then you have the dairy where all of the milk comes from. Now you have these three different entities that exist to produce your single cake. But those three different entities, they, exist in their own level, in their own world. And they now are able to produce everything that you need for all the different cakes in the world. So that would be kind of like pluralism in that, things can all exist all at the same time, and all of them can have different components that make up your individual cake. So your individual cake is a product of pluralism, the existence of different ways of being, right? Does that make sense? Amazon would be maybe the source for a lot of different things, right? If we were to use Amazon as a metaphor for this, that would be the source that then, distributes all the goods, the different types of goods. But that's not necessarily true because, right, Amazon has different vendors. There's different people. And so they are equal to Amazon because all these different vendors are able to sell directly to you as well. So maybe that's another metaphor that you could use to understand pluralism.
You need the customers. You don't have the customers, you can have all the vendors you want. No one's buying it. Does it really matter?
Yeah.
To them, it's just Amazon.
That's the rules of nature.
Well, now, I don't want to complicate it anymore, but if you really think, if you start going back on like on a spiritual level, right, you can start to get into other different understandings of how monism and pluralism can function, right? If you are, again, going back to the idea of being a Christian, if you're a Christian, but you also validate a person that is a practicing Hindu, right? You are then essentially saying that your individual world philosophy is monism, but you accept that pluralism, can also be a valid way of existing, right? Because, other people have different monistic points of view. Therefore, your worldview is a pluralistic worldview, but your spiritual life is a monistic life. See, so pluralism ends up kind of winning in the end because pluralism accepts that there are other ways of existing. Right? There are other ways of being. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So now, kind of going back to what the handout was saying about pluralism, right, is that monism is considered like the doctrine of unity, whereas pluralism is the doctrine of multiplicity. So if we're going to talk about unity, we have to, I think, understand that unity is not about everyone fitting in under the same umbrella necessarily. It's that we have an umbrella that's large enough to fit everyone. Does that make sense? Right? Not everybody has to follow what we say, but we have to at least, accommodate the voices of others. So if we think about the quotes that we were looking at at the beginning, right? Those who tell the stories rule society, that's partially true, but only if we are given that platform to tell our stories, right? How do we create that? Well, we create it for ourselves, but we can also create it for others, right? And if the function of art is not to talk about how beautiful something is, but its inner importance, why it's important, then we need to really think about, what are the stories that we're telling, and how are we telling them in a way that makes people feel like they can all come together. Also, just, we as individuals, we can belong to one place, but also belong to another. This is especially true if you are, an immigrant or the son or daughter of an immigrant, and that's where our poem of the day actually takes us. My throat is starting to get a little raw, so I'd like a volunteer to maybe read our poem of the day for us. So I have a volunteer. It's already up on the screen. Feel free to take it on.
I'll do it.
Excellent. Go for it, Tina.
Nothing to declare. There is no name for what rises in you as you enter the dim world of the taxi and wheel through the night, escorted by smooth jazz and a battalion of streetlights. At the airport, you heave the bags you have stuffed to the limits of carriage and check them in. You have no trouble knowing what to do with your empty hands. At security, the usual stripping. You surrender your body to the scan, the searching sweep, as if what is dangerous is not what cannot be so easily detected. You comply. You comply. At the gate, grateful to be early, you sit with your books, plug in devices that tether you to this place you're meant to be leaving, that crowd out thoughts of arrival and its bittersweet complications. You're going home or just visiting? Someone will ask. And you never know how you will answer. You know the bones of your mother's brown arms will wind around you. Her breath against your neck will baptize you again in names you have no one to call you in the other place you belong to. You know the waiting, untended in you will surge toward her, and you know something else will sulk itself into a familiar, necessary sleep. You know yourself now only as the ocean knows this island, always pulling away, always returning.
Excellent. Thank you, Tina. Do I have a volunteer to read it for us in Spanish?
Ahora,
Go for it.
no existe nombre para lo que surge dentro de ti, al entrar al mundo tenue del taxi y al rodar por la noche, escoltado por jazz ligero y un batallón de farolas callejeras. En el aeropuerto cargas las maletas que has empacado hasta su límite de capacidad y las facturas. No tienes problema saber lo que hacer con tus manos vacías. En seguridad, el desvestimiento usual. Entregas tu cuerpo al escáner, el rastreo, como si lo que fuera peligroso no es lo que no fácilmente se puede detectar. Cumples. En la puerta de embarque, agradecido por haber llegado temprano, te sientas con tus libros. Enchufas aparatos que te atan a este lugar que estás predestinado a dejar, que aíslan pensamientos de llegadas y sus complicaciones agridulces. ¿Regresas a casa o vas de vista? Te pregunta alguien. Y nunca sabes cómo responderás. Sabes que los huesos de los brazos color café de tu madre te rodarán. Su aliento contra tu cuello te bautizará de nuevo con los nombres que nadie te llamará en el otro lugar donde perteneces. Reconoces que la espera desatenida en ti surgirá hacia ella y sabes que algo más se hundirá, enfurruñándose en un sueño necesario y familiar. Ahora te reconoces tú mismo igual, como el océano solo reconoce a esta isla, siempre alejándose, siempre, siempre regresando.
Excellent. Thank you, Mao. That was a very good performance on both your parts. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Mao. Muy bien. ¿Cómo les parece? What do y'all think of Nothing to Declare?
I'll be thinking about this tomorrow night.
Why is that?
Because I'm actually, I have to fly out.
Well, best of luck on your trip, man. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll try.
Caro?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, y'all can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed this poem. And then yeah, there's just parts of it that really stuck to me, like the part of like the going home or just visiting. Someone will ask, and it's like that's like a very like that's it's like a sort of this like dualistic question. It's like, are you visiting or are you going home? And when a place is like kind of like could be kind of like home. So I don't know. I really I like the feeling behind this poem. I just like this poem. I have a lot more thoughts, but they haven't all like figured themselves out yet. But I just really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you, Caro. Yeah, and I think that there's definitely a question about what is home in this poem. Abraham?
Well, I think it just plays with the quote that you played today. Number one that said to look in the deeper meaning of things. Mm-hmm. I don't know if this poem is referring to just one actual trip or the fact of moving to a different place and staying there. Mm-hmm. Is it just you're feeling at home, or you feeling completely from that same place, mm-hmm. or are you just feeling like a visitor that never fits in and have nothing to declare? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how you tied in the title too. That's very, very good. Astuto el hombre. Miss Michelle?
Hi, everybody. It made me think about where I work at, because I work at a assisted living place for seniors, senior living, and it made me think about their home versus what they don't have versus what they do have because they pay per month. And it made me think about them in regards to their home. Mm-hmm. Because there are a few of them who wish they were home, meaning where they used to live, mm-hmm. versus where they live now. Because they're not, I won't say they're not content, but because of the COVID situation, mm-hmm. There's a few of them that say that I want to go home to my family, but their family is not there to be with them because they're either out of state or cannot see them because of COVID. And that's what made me think about that. Mm-hmm. And secondly, I thought about the song that Dionne Warwick in the revised version by Luther Vandross, "The House is Not a Home." And I thought about that also in regards to what those lyrics are. I'm looking at those lyrics today and play that song later on this evening and reflect that with what I heard today regarding this home. Mm-hmm. Because just because you have a foundation of a house with a structure does not mean it's a home. Yeah. It can be a place of living. It can be a skeleton versus a skeleton, a foundation of skeleton being a foundation versus a home, which is with warmth and love and happiness versus a structure that has nothing mm-hmm. or is empty. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, definitely. Yeah, I love these insights.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ani, then Miss Luz, and then Jess. Go ahead, Ani.
I'm going to borrow another writer's metaphor to kind of explain how I'm experiencing this poem. It's he wrote that having traveled and lived in so many different places, he wondered if it's possible to ever feel like you're at home anywhere, because everywhere he was, he had kind of his favorite things here and his favorite things there, and after a while, wherever you are, you're always missing some other place. And I kind of feel that way myself too. I've been looking for my home, and the more I travel, the more I move around, the more I feel like maybe I'm never gonna experience that feeling of like, this is it, I very much relate to what you said, Luis, about, belonging one place, but then belonging somewhere else. And I belong in my culture, but I also belong in the American culture. And I belong and I don't belong in both. Yeah. In equal measures, if that makes sense. Like, absolutely. Like very much so, and then very much not so. And yeah, you guys can relate, right? So this I feel that this really kind of illustrated that pluralism for me. I really got it now, because I got it on an emotional level where I can feel it. It's like, this is true, and yes, this is also true, and they all exist in the same, at the same time, in the same reality. At the same time that she feels, she feels at home in her mother's arms, there's a lot of mixed feelings that come with that. There's a reason why she moved away, and there are things in that other world that she came from that is still part of her, and so to be in one place, one part of her has to be lulled into sleep so that she can be present here. But at some point, she has to leave and go back to the other thing that that encompasses another part of herself, that are both in existence at the same time, and not one of them can ever be fully satisfied, and that's just the sad kind of melancholy nature of life. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share.
No, yeah, and I think that that's all very much, tied into everything that we're saying. The idea of pluralism in this poem in particular is that home can be one location, but home can also be another. Just like home can be, the embrace of a mother's arms, and also potentially being plugged in, can also feel like a place of comfort, like the poem is saying, right? And I guess it all depends on which part of the story you're telling. That's where that interpretation can exist. And to answer Caro's question, if being a citizen of the world is a form of monism, yeah, I think you could make that argument, right? That you may consider yourself to be a citizen of the world, while also at the same time, being a citizen of, say, Mexico or, Argentina. So, there's a lot of different ways in which all of these things can be interpreted. But Ms. Luz, and then it was Jessica next.
I really appreciated the sense of hyper awareness that you go into when you are traveling in an airport. You do tend, well, at least I do, to feel, very aware of what's going on, my surroundings, what I'm doing step by step. So I got that from the author, because I feel exactly that same way when I travel. Also a sense of like detaching from where I'm leaving. and the anticipation of arriving and who I'm going to be at my next destination. Am I going to recreate myself, reinvent myself? How do I have to behave for the people expecting me on the other side? So, and the particular line about where your home is, when I was living in Canada, the Canadians seemed to think it was very unusual that a US citizen would be living in Canada, and why. So they always really grilled me, why are you living in Canada? So it just brought back that memory, like, yeah, it's not my home. I didn't want to be mean and say, yeah, I really don't like it either, but here I am. But they were very curious, and then they always made me question, like, yeah, what am I doing in Canada? So it just elicited memories.
Well, I'm glad, and I think that, both you and Ani are expressing something that's important. The poem touched you on an emotional level, right? It played on your memory. Your form of existing was acknowledged by someone else's form of existing, right? So a little bit of pluralism happening there.
Yeah.
Jess?
I really liked what Ani had to say, because that's like where I took it. There's a specific part of this poem that I kind of broke down in my head. This is how I interpret it, where she says, the bones of my mother's brown arms will wind around you. Her breath against your neck will baptize you again, and names you have no one to call you in the other place you belong to. So I thought from an immigrant's perspective, like when she says the bones of your mother, I thought the cultural motherland, right? Your mother, like, I'm an American. My motherland, though, would technically be Mexico, right? So when she says, and this is how I perceive it, right? Because if I say I'm Mexican American here, that whole thing, like, you're not Mexican enough, you're not American enough, whatever, right? So motherland, I think when she says brown arms, I think, because when you go to your motherland, your arm, whether it's brown, red, white, black, but the color of that, you do feel more at home because there's more people that are your pigment, right? Your color. So I think that's why I think she intentionally used that descriptive word of brown arms to like show, like, going to your motherland, there's people that are like you, color. And then I think when she refers to the wind around you or her breath again will baptize you again, I thought of if you spoke a foreign language and you landed on this in your motherland, right? And there's people that looked like you, and they also spoke a language that you recognize that you weren't maybe brought up with. You do feel like this rebirth. You're like, oh my God, like, even though I didn't grow up here and I didn't raise here, but I speak that language, it feels like a rebirth, like I am part of this land that, okay, that's how I got it. I just really like that section because I think it broke it down for me. And how do you declare? What do I declare? Is there nothing to declare? I don't know. That's how I got it. I like that little thing.
No, I really like your dissection of the poem. It does speak to I think a very common experience that many of us have had or are capable of having, depending on where we're from. I saw a hand raised from Miss Michelle, and Abraham is trying to call out Ivan, but Ivan, I'll let you decide whether or not you got something to say. But Miss Michelle? Miss Michelle, are you there?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
Can you hear me?
Good. It made me think about the comfort of your mom if you were baptized when you were a child, or however you religiously, if you're baptized at a church, or if you're baptized in the water, or when you're a child, when you're baptized, the parent, and you come of your mom's arms, made me realize and give for mom made me also think about the loss, and you lost your mother and your father, and coming home to go to heaven, because that's where they'll be. In other words, when she is gone or he is gone, or any mom figure, it could be someone that's ascending to go to heaven, that he or she are being greeted in open arms, going home in that aspect, once he or she is gone. Because a mother can be a natural mother or an adopted mother or a relative who's adopted you to be your mom, because your actual mom wasn't there. Biological, adopted, another blood relative to take that place. And that comfort made me think about that in regards to moms, because some guys can be moms too, like some women can be moms and dads, right? So I thought about that aspect. And I also thought about the other songs too. Because my phone doesn't do share, does not do, I can't do the messaging on here, but I'm going to learn. I like what Frodo said, Mauricio said, and Carol said. And thank you, Tina, for the lyrics to A House Not a Home. However, I also thought about 3 other songs too. Papa was Rolling Stone by the Temptations, Homeward Bound by Simon and Garfunkel as well. And I thought about those songs because Homeward Bound means coming home to you, and Papa was a Rolling Stone because wherever he laid his hat was his home. So I thought about that also in regards to home. And those songs can also tell you a perspective of how the song I mentioned earlier, as well as the other 2 I just mentioned, can give you a perception of home, how a home is made, or how it is. And those songs came from the 70s. All of those songs came from the 70s, as a matter of fact. So Luther Vandross did his own version. So anyway, we all know the sign. There's no, the adage that goes, there's no place like home, or like the Wizard of Oz, right? There's no place like home. No place like home. The Wizard of Oz. When she clicks on Ruby Simmons, right? Click, click, click. By Dorothy. She's closing her eyes. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. 1, 2, 3, click, and then she's in it, right? So I thought about that also. I know that may not be relevant, but it's also important because it talks about home.
Yeah, and so I think that there's definitely been a lot of different things that have been mentioned, and I really appreciate the analysis that you guys have given this poem. And I think that the poem itself is trying to speak to the idea of what is actually home, right? What can you consider home, and what is it that a person can experience as home? Because one place might be home in the sense that you live there, you work there, you have a life there, but home can also be another place where you once lived and where you still have a life that is ongoing. But that also, I think, can speak to just what is our way of existing, right? It at least for me, the poem does remind me a little bit of the idea of ni de aquí ni de allá. You may belong to one culture, but you don't always belong to that culture because you don't fit in, kind of like how Ani was saying. You may not be Mexican enough to be Mexican, but you're not, white enough to be American, right? And so that's definitely something that you will experience as the son of an immigrant, or as the daughter of an immigrant. But that doesn't mean either that a person that doesn't have that particular experience won't also feel that, because even if you look like the people in power, if you're a disenfranchised person, if you're, say, not part of the same economic class, if you're a poor person and you're going to a dinner party where everyone is dressed up in a suit and tie and you can't afford it, you're going to feel out of place, even though you may look like the people that are there, right? And so there's different levels of existing. There's different levels in which we can all relate to one another. I honestly believe that a lot of times we are pitted against each other because of how we physically look, right? Going back to what Aristotle was saying, because of our outer beauty, right? We might be pitted against each other, but the thing that our stories can tell, the thing that is deeper, can be what is shared with one another. And so we can find different ways in which our existence can be just like someone else's existence, whether it be because of, our socioeconomic level, because of our ethnicity, because of our race, because, we are from the same country, or because we're not from the same country, right? Those are all different ways in which we exist that everyone else exists in, if that makes sense. So ultimately, I think that in order for us to try to create unity or to address unity, the idea of unity, we also have to address the ways in which we're all different. Therefore, the reason why I presented monism and pluralism today is because, we can go back and forth between the two concepts in the way that we're expressing ourselves, right? We can write a beautiful manifesto that says, we will give power to the poor, to people of color, to, people of a different gender, to people of a different sexual preference. We can give them all power because we can all recognize that we all come from the same source, right? We can acknowledge our pluralistic way of existing by saying that we exist because of one idea. We're all human. See? So we can go from the pluralistic idea to the monistic idea of unity, of the thing that brings us all together, of the common denominator. So, does anyone have any questions for me today? Any last comments or ideas they'd like to share?
Real quick, Luis.
Yeah.
I guess I just wanted to say, echoing back to what you just said, and Carl's message about how, calling someone a citizen of the world can be monistic. I think what I was thinking also is how you define the thing, whatever it is, how you define a person, those parameters which you define can change. And that can also kind of switch between the monistic and the pluralistic. Like in Abraham's example, his friend is from Bulgaria. So pluralism of a person from a different country could apply to that. But if you change that parameter and call him a citizen of the world or a human being on a biological level world, we might be all the same, but in different ways. Changing those parameters, I think is kind of going back to what you said, finding that common denominator. What's that parameter that we can all fit on? We are all humans. We are all citizens. We all feel, regret or pain or happiness, all these things that can unite us instead of splitting us apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually had a different writing prompt in mind, but right now, as you were speaking, Mal, you gave me a great idea for what the writing prompt will be. So thank you so much for what you just said, man, because it is important. I think that we understand just that we can define ourselves in a particular way. So thank you so much. I think you guys are going to have more fun with Mauricio's inspired writing prompt than the one that I was originally going to give you. Caro, I saw you raise your hand.
I just had a question about so I know that you said the definition about monoism. When you mentioned the definition of pluralism, you kind of said it was the opposite of mono, or it was seen as the opposite of monoism.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that within monoism there is no pluralism, or I don't know if that question makes sense, but because I know within pluralism we talked about monoism can't exist, but is the opposite true? Can you be monoistic and I guess believe in plurality, or is that not possible?
So I think the concept of monism is from from a philosophical standpoint, right? Monism basically says that all things originate from one source. If you want to boil it down to its most basic, right? That there is no such thing as physical nature. There's no such thing as anything that we can experience it to exist. It all comes from just one place. We are all made of the same exact thing. Whereas pluralism is basically, addressing all of those paradoxes of, well, gas isn't the same as a solid. A physical body, a human body, is not the same as, the construct of a car, right? So pluralism tries to say that there are different ways of existing. There are different modes of existence or different substances that make up our existence. So pluralism can live alongside monism because it accepts that there is a source, but what it tries to explain is that all things that exist in our universe exist in their own way. I hope that kind of makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody? Caro, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think so. I'm gonna puzzle this over some more. But yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if I can explain it in any other way. If anybody else comes up with another way of explaining it, feel free to share that in the chat or in the Google class. But I think if you want to reduce it down to its most basic elements, it's that, monism, think of just one. That's what mon means anyway, the prefix. So there's only one. There is a singleness to existing. Whereas pluralism, there's many ways. There's multiple ways of existing. So, a multiverse of stars or planets. So, almost had it with the cake metaphor. I guess, if food metaphors help, that we can always try to incorporate them. So, if there's any last questions, let me know. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and give you the writing prompt that Mauricio inspired just now. So your writing prompt for this week will be to define a person, whether that be in a poem or prose, but define a person for me.
Are you leaving this open for interpretation?
Yes.
Okay.
As all of the writing prompts are. It is open to interpretation.
So whether we're defining the concept of a person or we're defining an actual person, that's also left up to interpretation?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Sorry, guys.
I don't know. What did Mauricio say to inspire that? I cannot begin to imagine.
This is why I shouldn't drink when I'm in this class.
Hey, we're allowed to drink in here? I did not get that memo.
Yeah, but I'm going to stop.
What's implied?
It was implied. I mean, hey, whatever gets you through the day. I'm glad that y'all are taking Conchas y Café to the next level. There.
I had to. My mind was going in so many different directions. I had to numb it somehow. Shut up.
You have to change the name now.
I know.
Conchas y Champagne
It's like
or something.
It's like Conchas.
It's Conchas y Café con piquete. Yeah.
Conchas y cervezas.
Conchas y cervezas.
Yuck.
All right. Pues salud, compadre.
Conchas and spiked café.
Yeah, it's actually funny because let's see, where is it? This happens to be right behind my screen, so
It's empty.
it's almost empty.
It was full when the class started.
I swear, I have not touched it today. At least not yet.
Now we know what's happening when people start to turn their videos off.
Right, exactly.
We think they're going to the restroom. No.
All right. Well, I'm glad that we ended it on a light note. If if it helps, the prompt is just to hopefully just simply inspire you, right? But yeah, just define a person, right? This is very much open to interpretation. Have fun with it, and think about what we talked about, right? There's so many different ways of existing, and so I think that once you understand that there are different ways of existing, but ultimately there is a common denominator that unifies us as people, I think you'll come to a good place in your poem. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. If there are no more questions, we'll end it there. I hope y'all have a good rest of your week. Remember to upload your poems to the Google Classroom so that I can give you feedback. If you are having difficulty with that, I recommend checking out YouTube. There's a lot of tutorials on how to actually upload assignments to the Google Classroom. Yeah, I think that's it. I thought I saw somebody raise their hand again. Did somebody raise their hand? No. Jess, did you have a question? In the chat? Okay. Let me see it in the chat.
I thought I did. Maybe I didn't. I'm just saying. So if we send the manifesto to the assignment, you're gonna send it back with corrections because it's like a first draft, right? Or do you want us to send you like a final draft? Like I don't think I have a final draft.
No, you don't have to send me final drafts. Until we're finally collecting all the work to be published. But if you upload anything to Google Classroom, I'll do my best to give you feedback on it either directly in the Google Doc version that you provide, or if you give me like a PDF or something like that, then I'll try to give you notes on it in the comments section of the assignment. But that's basically it. Yeah. So, any last questions about that? No? All right. So yeah, safe trip, Mao. Cuídate, compadre. And everyone else, have a great night. Enjoy your drinks. Y hasta la próxima. Bye, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, all. Take care.
Everybody.
Thank you all.
See you next week.